welcome to another truly inspiring episode of Dr. Kamini Rao's Masterclass.
I think we were all kids' life compared to what it is now. Those days, I don't think anyone asked us what you want to become in your life. Each of the symptom at least is treatable. Each of the symptom can be contained. Contain all the symptoms, the person becomes normal.
How is mental health and yoga interconnected? And we would love to know.
So yoga is the central thing in mental health, if you ask me. You should also recall yoga itself is mind, any control of the mind. So in other words, that chitta vritti nirodha, that going on, brooding, shifting thoughts would probably straight away stop because now I'm focusing on my bodily perceptions and that bodily actions that I'm expected to do yoga with. So this is the mindfulness part of the yoga. And I believe that in terms of what meditation that we ask patients to do, this would be the meditation. And it perhaps answers your question, would I be meditating when I'm in the crowd, or whether I'm meditating, whether I'm... So whatever being mindful and that you are doing at that point of time, yoga karmasu kaushalam, being focused on what you are doing is yoga. And so this, I'm not deliberately separating yoga and meditation. In fact, it would be not correct that yoga be separated from meditation at all. Yoga is a meditation, but what part of the yoga emphasizes more on mindfulness and what does not is something that I think yoga experts perhaps comment. But I believe all through, whether I'm doing the yama or whether I'm doing the niyama, that part of it I am focused, I am being mindful. Having said this, I'll come back to the issue of what the public perceive psychiatrists as. For various reasons, historically, psychiatrists have been labeled with some degree of stigma, and more so psychiatric patients. This is because in the 50s and below, psychiatric disorders did not have the so-called modern medicine. We did not have the modern medicine. And the West, who thought only the modern medicine should help these people, and this modern medicine is not being there, they should be kept safely away from the society. And so the asylum concept started in the West and somehow got infected to our country as well. Asylums were not there in the pre-colonial era in our country, as far as I am aware. But yet, once the colonial era came and whatever they practicing, keeping these people away, and somebody would look after them. And those people who were looking after them slowly turned out themselves psychiatrists. And the psychiatrists usually never came in contact with the mainstream medical professional group. And so both psychiatrists and psychiatric patients, for some way or other, was seen as untouchables or stigmatized and so on and so forth. This, of course, was in the pre-colonial era and also in the post-colonial era when the medicines became available from 1950s onwards. But it took almost till mid-70s where people thought psychiatry should be brought back into a hospital-based medicine. So general hospitals started opening psychiatric wards, psychiatric PG courses, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, the Postgraduate Institute of Psychiatry. Although they were general hospitals, they started the PG degree. Many people started following it. And so the psychiatrists started coming to the mainstream. But nonetheless, the public perception that the psychiatrists are queer has still to be erased. I think it will get erased over the course of time. And it's also true that some could be thinking that the moment I go to a psychiatrist, I'll be labeled mad by the society. Not necessarily by the psychiatrist. Psychiatrists might not label it all, but the fact that I came to a psychiatrist, my neighboring people, my family members, my classmates, or my colleagues, my relatives are going to label me as somebody who has not a sane mind. And in fact, it is not true. Now, today, over these last 3-4 decades, I've seen many celebrities also are willing to actually disclose I had psychiatric illness, I consulted so and so, and I am now fine. There are many public who are also willing to be going to a psychiatrist without having had this stigma feeling in their mind. So this psychiatrist labels me is not true. The society labels, and that's what the individual is worried about. Psychiatrist may or may not label him at all. In fact, in most situations, we don't label at all. We don't label this fellow as a mad fellow. The mad conditions, as what you may be using that word, would be hardly 1% of all the psychiatric population we see. Bulk of the psychiatric populations are persons who would be walking around with us without having been able to disclose that this person was psychiatrically ill. Just as much as you would be seeing many diabetics and hypertensives amidst us, you will not know whether they had a diabetes or a hypertension unless they disclose. Unless this fellow says, I have been having obsessive compulsive illness, I have been having depression or anxiety, nobody else will know that this person actually has an illness. But his suffering is something that he would like to go to the doctor, get treated, get better, and come back. But of course, a group of people who will have behaviorally not well, what society called them mad, but we call them as psychotic disorders, similar to a person who has had a paralysis, who has been having an asthmatic attack. We can see him visibly distressed. Here, he is also visibly distressed, but he is not having insight into that. So, the visible portion of the severe mental disorders are a minuscule proportion of the mental disorders. But of course, they are so severe and they need longer term contact treatment. They, of course, we behold them as something quite serious. At the same time, common mental disorders, which are there all around us, people go around, there is no issue at all, but they are suffering, they come to us for treatment. So the psychiatrists having to label somebody as mad or not mad is not something that is a practice now, and it is not going to be a practice ever for that matter. But more importantly, more and more people have now begun to realize yoga has made an important role in mental disorders as a treatment. While we agree that treatment of psychiatric condition in a sizable proportion of them, medicines are required. A much larger proportion, medicine may not be the first line or the treatment that may be required. So in them, there are many non-medicine treatments that have already been in vogue. Psychotherapies, cognitive psychotherapies, behavior therapies, marital counseling, therapies that were under practice, any very formidable rival to those treatments. And I'm sure yoga would work in many of these conditions if properly researched, planned, and executed in terms of therapeutic applications, which some evidence has already been building. Unfortunately, in the modern days of randomized, double-blind clinical trials, yoga may not fit in to be able to comply with that design. You cannot blind a yoga procedure and give a placebo yoga. You cannot assess an individual who is getting a yoga and who is getting a non-yoga intervention. Is not going to happen. Both people will know what they were getting. So there are some challenges in the current days of modern double-blind clinical trials. We will not be able to compete with those research designs. But nonetheless, consensus experience has been that those who have been prescribed yoga and fine-tuned yoga practices for different symptom clusters, they have shown benefit. And of course, a host of biological research in neuroscience of yoga has shown that what may be implicated in certain psychiatric disorders is in fact corrected by yoga practice. One simple example is that stress, anxiety, depression elevates our cortisol, or whether the cortisol increase causes these conditions or these conditions cause increased cortisol elevation is a different question. I am not alluding to that right now. But the fact remains, practicing not only brings down depression, not only brings down anxiety, it also brings down the cortisol level. There are many examples of what biological changes which are pertinent to that given symptom cluster or a given psychiatric diagnosis that yoga will facilitate is an issue which is beyond perhaps the scope of present discussion. But a lot of research has occurred, and in fact, many people have written books on psychiatric applications of yoga. In fact, even in NIMHANS, we very recently, few months back, brought out a book on a standard textbook on yoga applications in mental health and neurological disorders. So there is evidence that you should use because there is a lot of experience which is supposed, which is quite favorable to practicing yoga, and I think we should use that. But please remember, whenever yoga is prescribed, I am not saying you should discontinue medicine where it is required. Medicines may be the mainstay in some disorders, and yoga could be the mainstay in some disorders.
Yeah.
But there could be many disorders where both can work together.
Yeah, Dr. Gangadhar, I was just wondering that, see, now that being as a president of the Medical Assessment and Rating Board, would you recommend yoga as a kind of, say 2 weeks, like how we did for psychiatry in the MBBS, at least say some 2 weeks in the national, the DNB or in MD, so that it at least warrants one question in the papers, so that people take yoga seriously, so that they can implement this in their practice seriously. What do you think?
At this point of time, I may not want to comment on this, Dr. Kamini Rao. Okay. There are two reasons why I want to say this. In the National Medical Commission, there are different subdivisions. There is a UG Medical Education Board, and then there's a PG Medical Education Board, who will decide what curriculum suits best for the students. This is number one. As you can see in a very recent regulations, a draft version which has come on the net, there was a suggestion that residents, interns, if they want to get exposed to some form of traditional systems of treatment, it is not that they must get exposed, but if they like that, I want to know what yoga does, I want to know what Ayurveda does for my patient, can he or she get a chance to have an elective posting of 1 week or 2 weeks? Of course, there are elective postings that they choose to work in XYZ, the mainstream specialties. But if for some reason or other, if that given hospital or that medical college also has a very strong Ayurveda or yoga division, can this doctor choose to work for a week and get a feel of what it is? This option has been given. Right now, rather than mandating anything, look, anything should come a little more voluntary acceptance of people into their clinical service and clinical expertise choices. So currently, for the first time, I think the National Medical Commission, the UG board has introduced the internship regulations, which is still not accepted. It is still in the draft version. It is going on around in the net, and people are commenting on that. In that, there was a concern whether this 1 week has been mandated. But I think some of you should read the whole thing. This is a first step, perhaps, to get people have a choice. People should have a choice whether they want to also get some familiarity with these yoga systems. Now, this gives an opportunity. And if more and more people, more and more students, more and more doctors think that as allopaths, we should also be putting some yoga into practice, I think time will unfold. Only time will tell us whether this will become a part of the curriculum or not.
And today, as I see, psychiatry has become more a symptom approach rather than a diagnosis approach. Would you agree with me on this, Dr. Gangadhar?
What are you going to say about idiopathic host of medical disorders? Whether it is hypertension or whether it is diabetes or host of it. It's all true, isn't it? So I think symptom, whatever we say, remains. Over only time will tell us whether every disease will have one cause. I don't know whether we will accept that one cause. If not all, a gene will not again explain everything. Even in monozygotic twins, only 50% concordance is there for a severe condition such as even schizophrenia, which is conceived to be almost entirely biological. So the genes, in spite of sharing the same genes, did not express similarly in both the fellows. So there is surely an environmental influence which will make the gene express. So gene alone may not be the entire answer, but gene and its expression by the environment, the way we upbring the individual, the diet, and 100 things, exercise, lifestyle.
Yes,
many things could still be influenced. We may not have the last answer at this point of time. We don't know how the science unfolds, maybe in a couple of decades, maybe more.
Yeah, they always say initiator gene and promoter gene. So initiator gene may be in the body, but unless you have the promoter gene promoting it from the environment, you still may not manifest the disease. So that may be one of the
Yeah,
reasons looking on it.
but we
That's
should
true.
be hopeful, we should be open, we should be scientific, we should keep searching for the truth until the truth comes, we don't end our search.
That is true, but in fact, they also put across these sexual, aversions, in the sense that lesbianism and the LGBT community, etc., are all linked to genes. Now, for example, that also has to be, at least has been proven to a point. But whether all those who have that gene predilection manifest that particular, type of behavior is still to be seen. So still work has been going on in this area, and we don't have the last word on it at the moment. So we will have to wait for more research in this area.
Let's keep searching.
Yes. So if I could ask you, and if you could tell me, if you were to hold on some memories from your life forever in your clinical practice, what are the incidents in your clinical practice? What would it be?
Oh, there are many. Like, I recall we diagnosed a condition called as mania. Person who is elated, who is talking a lot, who has grandiose ideas. I was just then become a MD, past senior resident, and this was a case of a clear-cut mania, and it was not difficult to diagnose. It was mania. And in the rounds, the junior resident was presenting, and it was the senior most consultant. I still have learned a lot of psychiatry from Dr. Channabasavanna, who was my professor, and who, of course, recently passed away about a couple of years ago. He came to the rounds, and his one question made the diagnosis different. He asked this person, have you been using any cannabis? He used the Kannada word for that. He said, yes, our guru gives me, and I have been smoking until I came here, I was smoking. It is known that cannabis-induced manic syndrome is there, mania may not be the diagnosis there, and cannabis is known to cause. And it was something, maybe the earlier junior president had asked, I don't recall now, but that one question made a difference. So there are many such small examples that have molded my learning. Very, very importantly is to be listening to the patient. Whereas in the initial days, we were very eager to be talking, allaying their anxiety, explain to them that this is not this condition, this is not this condition. We were more anxious to be explained to them. But I think as psychiatry moved on and as we became more and more experienced, we tend to become perhaps more patient to listen to them. And listening to them actually eases a lot of their concern. This is one central issue which I learned from one of my own teacher. Actually, she is from clinical psychology. And she, Dr. Satyavati, whom I should remember many times, one of the doctor couple whom I had seen and had diagnosed anxiety disorder in the one of them, and another person I had diagnosed something else. We end up in making a reductive hypothesis of giving a diagnosis. And she said, okay, let me see them. I took them to their room, and within a couple of minutes of talking, both the couples started weeping. How there were so much of differences of opinion between them, and how each person wasn't listening to the other person, how each person was egoistic, etc., etc. In a 40-minute session, it was almost 37 minutes. They went on narrating their concerns. It was just last 2 minutes, madam summarized, and then she said, look, it's all fine. I think we will come back to the next session that Gangadhar will listen to you. For the time being, for the next 3-4 days, that medicine that he has given keeps you more at peace, and you can come back and continue to discuss with them. This doctor couple came back to me, though I must admit they were elder to me for some reason or other. They continued to be coming to me, and then they got a lot better. And this practice of just listening and triggering them to be able to talk is some skill that I think as a psychiatrist I have learned from these two senior people.
Excellent. So, what would your message be to all our viewers watching this show, Dr. Gangadhar? And how would you like to advise the young Gangadhars that are watching this show, that is the youth today, about becoming a successful person like you?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm in a position to advise, but what I began with in this interview, begin with, try to be a good person. A good person is a person who society will recognize. You don't have to necessarily make yourself good as a definition by looking at somebody. It could well be somebody who is good, but there can be good in many people. Whether all those goods in other people can come into me. So I know idealistic is not necessarily will happen, but that good person is more important. The good profession will automatically happen. Today's education system actually lets you become a good graduate, whichever is the branch you study. But whether you will be a good professional graduate in that area is something that the second half of what you're going to be learning, lifestyle, family, friends, your own personal dedication, these things continuously searching for the truth. These things I think one has to imbibe himself with his own efforts or with the help of the community which is around him or her. But colleges should, of course, be sources of good education in terms of a graduation degree. But other things, I think we should continuously upgrade ourselves. The second doesn't stop. The first might stop with my degree or my PG or whatever it is. The second part of being good and better and the best can continue, and we should always keep our mind open to be learning from all experiences that we will get as we keep progressing. Be eternally a student, not merely to improve my skills in my medical profession, but my skills to be a good person in the society.
So that was Dr. Gangadhar for you. Be a good person, keep your mind open, learn things around, don't have any antisocial activities, and that is what you need to do. Do your best. Don't think failures are final, and keep on working at it, and you will succeed. And that's what Dr. Gangadhar has a message for you. Please keep on working at it. There's no substitute to hard work. Thank you very much, Dr. Gangadhar. It was a pleasure to have you on our show. Now, dear friends, that was Dr. Kamini Rao's masterclass. Keep on watching till our next episode. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Kamini.